It's a great pleasure to be with you today. If there was a saint to be beloved by those of us who love our history, it would be St. Luke, who attempted to write the only accurate life of Jesus of Nazareth and wrote Acts of the Apostles. The patron saint of physicians and artists. Can you imagine a life without doctors and art? Would be impossible. 7,000 St. Luke's churches in 175 countries. And the last time I counted, 9 on Merseyside, not counting this epic building. I've always loved projects with lots of twists and turns, and this one certainly had them. Reminds me of a quote in an early biography of the great architect Sir Christopher Wren, who said, if God had built buildings, there'd be no difficulty. It's when he gets men involved that all the trouble starts. It was 1791 when the Earl of Derby gave this land on the grounds that it could only be used for Anglican worship. Mind you, it was 20 years before Mayor Drinkwater laid the foundation stone. John Foster Senior and Junior, the town surveyors, were in dispute with the town council over various matters at the time when the work was supposed to begin. In fact, it was 1832 when the church was finally consecrated, 41 years after the land had been granted. It was in 1832 that the council was self-elected for the last time. And at that stage, a small amount of people were allowed for the first time to be involved in the choosing of their local members. Once the church was opened, it made a great impression in this neighbourhood very quickly, although of course this was at the very edge of the town at that time. There was an extraordinary piece of litigation that lasted over 40 years about the noise of the bells. It was a very important bell frame here, very unique in its conception, but there was a glorious dispute between, shall we say, different denominations about the noise of the ring. The church was used by the corporation for many years for all of its official events. Indeed, St. Luke's Day, the 18th of October, was traditionally at that time the day when the mayor would change. The church was extremely popular, except that the councillors found the walk from the town hall rather too much, and in the end chose a church nearer to their building. As we come to the fire, the tremendous dramatic night of the 6th of May 1941, in the 1970s I spoke to 2 fire watchers who were here on that night. They were very unlucky to lose this. Basically, by the time the fire started here, there were just too many fires in the area. And although there were nearly 24 watchers at the start of that evening, many of them had been diverted to other fires. The fire caught on in the upper levels very quickly, which then caused the collapse down to ground level. They were very unfortunate to lose their church. It is a curious thing, however, that because of what happened to this church, more people, many more people, will refer to it as the Bombed Out Chuch as to its actual saintly name. And presumably, if the church had remained in good order, without any damage, at some point in the early 70s, it probably would have closed anyway, due to congregation numbers. So in a sense, what happened to it? The great event of which it was a part, that which made it a monument, and that's another story by the way, that which made it a monument, made it so much better known than it might otherwise have been. One of the 4 books about this church, written over a century ago, was called Peace and Good Neighbourliness. And when you think now that this church, this site, has now become the centre of an area where you might hear dozens of languages and a huge and diverse mixture of cultures. It's kind of battered and bewildered outlook, this idea of it surviving its ruin to become lived in again and used again, and indeed as popular in its own curious way as it ever was. Sums up a kind of Liverpool determination, its bounce back ability, as you might say. That, I think, why this church is beloved for what it was and what it is in a more secular society than that of which it was a part. I wish this project all well and good, and believe that this building will again become a centre of a very vibrant neighbourhood. Thanks very much.